was a privilege of a lifetime to serve in the Bush administration on the Florida Public Service Commission. The diversity of our bench meant that there were decisions that were very well-rounded and had keen attention to the impact on a diverse group of constituents and interests in the state of Florida. A diverse table means that there's diversity of thought. In this next video series, I'm joined by former PSC Chairman Ronald Brisé, who's now the practice group leader of the Gunster law firm, Tim Simon, a former commissioner from the California Public Service Commission, and also one of the founding members of the National Utilities Diversity Council, along with the American Association of Blacks in Energy President, Paula Glover. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for doing this. We'll be sensitive to your time and try to keep this dialogue to an hour. Real important here to start with introductions. We've got the very wonderful Paula Glover, just a great leader, national leader. Paula, do you want to introduce yourself and what you do and tell us about AABE?
I like to leave it at great national leader, but okay. No, my name is Paula Glover. I am the president and CEO of the American Association of Blacks in Energy. We are a 43-year-old association, primarily, but not only, African-American professionals who work in every single sector of the energy industry across all kinds of business units within our industry. Focus is really one big focus, right? Increased representation, greater representation of African-Americans in this industry, because what we know, and there was an article in the paper in the Hill today, African-American communities across income deciles spend more on energy than other communities of the same incomes. So we gather to, one, ensure that energy policy does not disenfranchise us, that we are not disproportionately impacted by the policies that are put in place. But we understand that without our proper representation, it's very hard to ensure that that does not happen. So we are also always hyper-focused on where is there representation in our organizations, not just at the lower and mid levels, but who are our senior leaders, who sits on our boards of directors, who are the businesses that our companies are doing business with, who own those companies, and quite frankly, who are our policymakers. And so I think about representation very, very broadly. And at the end of the day, we are most concerned with community impact. But what we know is that if we are not in every single place along that value chain within our organizations, then it's very easy for these kinds of things to happen.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Lila, for convening us. It's a great pleasure to be here with colleagues and former colleagues. And so I have the great honor and pleasure of succeeding Lila as the Government Affairs Practice Leader at Gunster. And I had the opportunity in my past lifetime to serve the state of Florida in a couple different capacities. So I served as a legislator representing one of the very diverse districts in Miami-Dade County, the 108th District, and had the opportunity to serve on the Florida Public Service Commission, had the opportunity to serve as chair for a period of time. I currently also am involved in a lot of things. I'm a member of AABE, but I'm also on the board of NUDC, which is the National Utilities Diversity Council. I serve as its secretary on the board, and Commissioner Emeritus Simon was one of the founders of that organization. One of the things that has always been part of my interest is economic empowerment. You cannot change communities, you cannot advance communities if you do not have a solid economic base. And I'm so glad to be part of this conversation today.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you. California's in the house today, y'all.
Thank you, Lila, or Commissioner Emeritus Jaber and Commissioner Emeritus Brisé and Madam President Glover. Yes, out here from the West Coast, and it's an honor to be a part of this dialogue, this very timely and needed dialogue. I'm the principal and founder of TAS Strategies. We do both legal and consulting, similar to Gunster, in areas surrounding infrastructure, largely in the energy, telecom, and then financial services space. I served on the California Public Utilities Commission for 6 years, or just 5 years and like 11 months, which is just a month short of 6 years. And prior to that, I was appointment secretary to Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. In fact, I was the first African-American to serve that role in California since its becoming a state in 1848. While on the commission, I became very active in NARUC, and I was the chair of the gas committee. I also chaired a partnership between the Department of Energy and NARUC for liquefied natural gas. I served on the National Petroleum Council. I also was the vice chair, what was then called the Utility Marketplace Access Subcommittee, and was part of the team with then NARUC President David Cohen that made it a permanent subcommittee of the reporting to the board of directors. And now it's the subcommittee on supplier and workforce diversity. And I want to give a shout out to Commissioner Oliva, Chairwoman Oliva, who I think is doing a phenomenal job in that capacity. And I know that Commissioner Brisé also served in a vice chair position as well on that very important committee within NARUC. I also currently serve on the board, the national board of the of AABE, and I also serve on the statewide California board, and I chair the California Black Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors. So outside of my practice, my day-to-day is very much involved in the economic empowerment of African Americans in our state, and we're the 5th largest economy in the world. So you should imagine that has a very large impact. So I'm very excited about our dialogue today, and just look forward to really hearing these brilliant minds and offering what little, probably de minimis input that I can.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you. You are a powerhouse all by yourself. So I'm Lila Jaber, and one of the things I'll share about myself early on is I'm Arab American. I'm Palestinian by heritage and Muslim by religion, and just really have always been aware of the importance of diversity in everything that we do in America. My father, very early on, when I was young, he would say, if you want to change something, you have to be part of it. And you're going to have to work hard, very, very hard, maybe harder than the next person. And when you succeed, it wasn't a question of if you succeed. When you succeed, you're going to have to do that for others. You're going to have to, what we know today is pay it forward. My father had a 5th grade education and was very wise, street smart and people smart. So that stayed with me as I got appointed to the Florida Public Service Commission in the Jeb Bush administration. It was during that service that the companies, electric companies in particular, came to visit us, and they said, we're having a hard time recruiting minorities and women into the industry with the right hand, and with the left hand, we're losing a lot of institutional knowledge. We've got folks that are retiring. And that stayed with me. And as you all know from the bully pulpit, the things that we can do, we can sponsor NARUC resolutions, and, we can message from the bench. Well, we did all that. I did all of that when I was chair of the Florida Commission, made sure to message appropriately, did the tours, did the mentoring, made sure I paid attention to what was happening in minority supplier diversity within the companies. But there really wasn't much I could do in terms of our jurisdiction, right? And making things happen. That stayed with me when I got to the point in private practice where I could use my voice and success to fund an initiative. I went to my law firm at the time, and to their credit, they've been very, very supportive, Gunster, of beginning an initiative called Florida's Women in Energy Leadership Forum. So today, that's become almost my full-time job, just making sure that, again, women and minorities have opportunities in all of the regulated industries. And in January of this year, I was also appointed to the Chesapeake Utilities Board of Directors. So that's who I am. So how about we dive right in? Let's thank you. Let's just talk about why it was important for us to have those positions that we were in and the impact we think we each had in those roles. And Ron, I'm going to start with you in that regard.
Sure. Thank you, Lila, for the opportunity to share. I think diversity comes in many different forms, and like they always say, like we've heard in many circles, that diversity is sort of being invited to the dance, and then the inclusion part is actually being asked to dance or being empowered to dance, right? I prefer to use the term empowered to dance, because someone can ask you to dance, but you're just out there, versus being empowered to dance. So, I had the opportunity to serve as the 3rd Haitian American elected to the Florida House in the state in Florida. So that brought a different perspective to the table. And then I became the the first Haitian American to serve on a public service commission in the country. And the reality for me is that wherever we are, we have the responsibility to ensure that we create pipelines for others and that we hold people accountable. And so during my time in the legislature, one of the things that some of my colleagues and I, we would hold informal meetings with agency heads to go over who are in their teams, who are members of their leadership teams, and what are their procurement practices. And just the mere fact of us having those conversations with them, considering that as legislators, you control their purse strings, resonated with them and had a significant impact on the things that they began paying attention to. And I think that the same is true at the commission. It's great that Florida has had a history of having strong African-American commissioners that have come in, and when I say African-American and Arab commissioners that have come in and all right, that have come in and made sure that the commission itself is diverse. And one of the things that is important as commissions, you can't ask of somebody something that you are not doing yourself. And so one of the things that we were fighting for during our time there is to make sure that we had people across the board on teams in the commission that not only were they there, but they had upward mobility opportunities. And we ensured that when those opportunities were available, that people were looking in their downlines for opportunities. And we did some things. For instance, there was a huge divestment dealing with nuclear plants, $1.3 billion. We fought to make sure that minority banks were at the table in that process. So it's things like that when we are present, things that others may not think of, not because they're being malicious or anything of the sort, it doesn't come naturally to top of mind. But since we've experienced some of the challenges of trying to compete, we recognize those things, and then we try to create those opportunities for people to walk in that door.
Did you consciously notice the narratives changed and faces changed and questions that you might ask from the podium about procurement policies or job creation became something that was brought to your attention through testimony or briefings?
Absolutely. I always used to say, we must look like those we serve. And when you come before us, we should look like those who are paying for the service. And that needs to happen all across the spectrum in any company. And so I began to see that there was a change in those who appeared before us. I also saw that there were certain things that were highlighted in testimony. For instance, expressing that there is language diversity in the things that are presented to customers, and different types of programs were highlighted to reflect that there is thought and an effort to ensure that everyone has equal access to the programs that are being provided, and companies have opportunities to engage.
Tim, did you have similar experiences?
Somewhat similar. When I served under Governor Schwarzenegger's appointment secretary, it's interesting that both of us came out of Republican governors. He gave me a blank check on diversity. In fact, he was often expressing his disappointment that I wasn't appointing more African Americans to his administration, and that encouraged me. So I knew when I came to the commission, I already had a reputation of being very focused, or as we would say today, going hard in the paint on the issue of creating access to communities that have been historically disenfranchised. And that historical point is very important at this time, because I think it's really important for people to understand, and particularly those who may be relatively new to this country compared to those of us whose ancestors go back to, for example, mine, who fought in every war in the history of this country, that the Reconstruction period had made certain 14th Amendment guarantees that we all studied in constitutional law. But those guarantees were breached by President Andrew Johnson and this government. And as a result of that, there were programs that were developed that were specifically designed to try to remedy past discrimination. That was the basis of what we called affirmative action back then. I'm that old, okay? And then it expanded into diversity. But I think part of the problem is that if you don't know your roots, it's very difficult. Marcus Garvey said that, people that don't know their history is like a tree without roots. And I think we have to start talking more of the truth. And if anybody were to go back to my decisions, my comments from the dais, I was just trying to tell the truth. And, I think what happens over time is that we begin to moderate to try to make certain people not feel uncomfortable about the truth. And I think if I were talking to the current commissioners sitting on the various states, I'd say stop doing that. Really just discuss the truth. So in my view, when I became a commissioner, every decision, as far as I was concerned, had a diversity component to it.
In this July 4th weekend, I'm thrilled to be able to show you part 1 of this video. The beauty of America is its diversity. I ask you today simply, how diverse is your table?